Kathy McCovey, McCovey. Come from the Barger family.
Okay. And could you tell me about your tribal affiliation?
I'm Karuk.
And I'm sitting here without my tablet with my questions.
Oh, stay there. We're good.
Like, well, and then I know I have other questions. I wanted to kind of stick with the same order. And do the Karuk people have a relationship with the Klamath River, and what is that relationship?
Well, we've been on the Klamath River for generations, hundreds of years, thousands of years. And through that time, the Klamath River has sustained us. Our life is the river, and the river is us. We get our salmon from it, our basket materials. We look to the river to give us strength, and that's how people could survive so long in an area like this in the mountains, is because of the river and the creeks that feed the river. It's the lifeblood of the Karuk people.
Do the Karuk people have stories about floods? Like some of the people I've talked to said they're actually like the kind of the traditional flood story that you hear in a lot of different cultures.
I haven't heard too many of the stories through my time. I've kind of focused more on plants and animals. So when my grandmother passed away when I was fairly young, and my great grandma told my uncle a lot, and a lot of things that I learned from my uncle and then from other people. But if we sit down and talk to the other elders, things would come out. It's just something that we haven't started that conversation about the floods.
That's okay. I think Julian told us some flood story. I just like to ask different people, the same question and see just different takes on the story. So that's fine that we don't talk about that particular.
Well, everybody knows a little bit of everything, you know what I mean? Different people, and Julian knows a lot, and he talks to a lot of people, and a lot of his family have passed down that history. They've been very strong family, united and really close.
And so it sounds like you have a lot of background with plants.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, when I was growing up, I grew up, lived with my grandparents, Ernie and Esther Spinks, and my uncle, Casey Spinks. And some of my earliest memories are of going to the river with my grandmother to pick willow sticks. And the willow is what they call the sandbar willow or the gray willow. And some of my earliest memories is going down, picking the basket sticks, and then my grandmother would take them home and dry them and then put them in bundles, and then she would put them up in the attic. And she was carrying on the tradition of basket weaving that my great grandmother had carried on. But see, my grandma was so busy. She worked, she raised kids, she raised her grandkids. She was a cook at almost all the restaurants. They really liked my grandma's cooking. So wherever restaurant she went to, that's where the mill workers and the people of the town would go. So she spent a lot of time with domestic activities to raise her family, but she also spent quite a bit of time going out and gathering things. Like the blackberries, and I remember going to elderberry picking with her, and fishing. She used to take us trout fishing all the time, downriver a couple miles. She had a favorite hole. I remember going with her down there, and she'd be out there fishing for trout for dinner. I'd be over on a sandbar playing with frogs. And so my earliest memories are of traveling around this area picking mushrooms, Chinook mushrooms, looking for hazelnuts. That was one of the favorite activities. Everybody load into the car, and then we drive up in the mountain and look for hazelnuts, and then go fishing down at the falls. I can remember sitting up on a bench above Ishipishy Falls, watching my grandfather down there at Ishipishy Falls with the dip net with the rest of the men.
What was he fishing for?
Salmon, and usually the fall salmon. We would go down there every fall, and we'd go down a couple times and then get salmon, bring it home, process it for the winter. And that, and when I got younger, he actually let me go down to the falls with him. And that was pretty awesome, being down there in the canyon with the big rocks and you know, there's a lot of power in the river through there, and you wouldn't know it until you get down there, and the smell, it has a distinctive smell.
Oh,
You
we'll
want to
just
quit
pause
for a
till
minute?
the car gets by. I've been down there. That is an amazing spot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now I was reading something recently, and we don't have to worry about recording this part. But I was reading something recently about that being a spot that's a sacred spot, that they really were like not wanting people to just go to that spot.
No,
Okay.
because it's part of the war renewal ceremony, and then a lot of the people fish down there. The men go down there and fish, and there for a while, when I was younger, they would fish at the falls, and then you'd see a whole bunch of fishermen down there. I mean, a line of about 20 or 30 fishermen, and that was like would have been in the 60s. But then slowly but surely, you know, the runs differ year to year, more salmon, less salmon. But then I think, Uncle Casey, why did the fishermen stop fishing at the falls down there? The pole fishermen.
The fishing game tried to make them stop completely, you know, but they.
It was the pole fishermen, though. I know that they tried to do that to the Karuk fishermen with the dip nets, but they did it to the pole fishermen too? Oh, okay. The Fish and Game stepped in and kind of wanted to regulate everything on the river more and more. And then so they kind of cut the pole fishermen off. But the tribal people, that's where we go to get our yearly salmon. Now, it used to be little villages along the river, and there were many, had their fishing spots that they would go and get fish. And sometimes people had rights to, some people who didn't live exactly at the falls had the right to go over and fish on a certain day. And so they would fish, and then the Fish and Game came in and tried to control the river, but the Crook people never quit fishing at the falls, dip net fishing. It is something that they've always done. And so sometimes when you get into court and then you get into rights, and the Crooks never gave up their rights. They never gave up their rights to hunt, to fish, or to gather. They always retained those rights. And there was this treaty that was signed in the 1800s by Roderick McKee, came up and made treaties with a lot of the tribal groups, and he made treaties with the Karooks. They took it back to Congress, and Congress never ratified the treaty. But the Indian people on the river, they'd made this agreement with this man, this person that was supposed to be representing the government. So, you know, they just felt that this was, you know, something that they agreed to. And when McKee went back, the Congress said we weren't going to ratify it. So one of the things that happened through time was that then the river corridor and the lands became national forest system lands. So then you had native people living in different areas. Their family villages lived there for generations. And then the Forest Service people show up and say, you could put in an allotment. You could ask for the plot of land, but you had to prove that you had a tie to that land. So a person would put in for an allotment, then the person at the time that okayed those allotments or said yes or no, you can have this allotment, was the forester. It was the district ranger. So they would go to these people's area that they put in for allotment and said, no, you can't have this for an Indian allotment. You can't grow crops here. You can't do agriculture, or it's more important for growing timber. But what the forester didn't understand was the Karuk had their own form of agriculture, gathering the plants, manipulating the vegetation in the tan oak trees with fire. You know, they were subsisting. Uncle Casey tells me that my great-grandma, Dolly Pepper, would say, everything that we need to subsist on is out our back door. So it was that kind of very lush, very environmentally rich area that had so many resources if you paid attention and knew how to do it, and that oral history taught us how to live off the land like that. That's when the floods came. We had all these resources that we continued that culture of gathering, storing, and putting food resources away for the winter, or for a couple, to have a couple years worth of food stored in case of hard times, like in the floods.
And it sounded like.
I'm gonna have to pause it. Sorry, we're gonna have to get some shade. You want to try that?
Okay.
You can
We'll
stay
just-
still. You're fine.
Yeah, you're fine. We're
Okay.
just gonna shade you a little bit so that your color looks good.
But I also want to add in there, it wasn't just the foresters that basically took land from the Indian people. The Bureau of Indian Affairs in the 20s and 40s, it sent representatives up through the Klamath River, and it would have an Indian allotment, let's say located across the river. The people at that time, they made hunting and fishing illegal. And a lot of things, the way that we gathered resources and did the subsistence was made illegal by the government representatives. So they sent the Bureau of Indian Affairs representatives up, and if they saw a plot of land, they would, and nobody was living on it, they would send a letter to that family and said, we are selling this land in your best interest. Neither you nor your heirs can buy this land. I know an older Crook man that told me that he got a check in the mail for 40 acres of land. He got a check for $4 and like 36 cents, and he said he sent it back to them, Bureau of Indian Affairs. They sent him another letter that said, we are depositing this check into the Bank of America in Eureka. And he looked at me and says, you could probably go out and check that Bank of America's records, and that check's probably still there. I never touched it.
Wow. How you doing there, Robert? Just want to make sure he
Okay,
laughs
well,
and doesn't
we'll
like
focus
pass
on
out,
the.
There we go.
Okay.
Because
Sorry.
if he lands on you, it's not going to be good.
No, it'll be sideways.
Could you describe where you were living during the flood, and if you could, maybe just elaborate a little bit more about where Happy Camp is for people who haven't been here?
Well, Happy Camp's probably, I believe it's about 86 miles to the west of Wairika. It takes about an hour and 30 minutes to travel from Wairika to Happy Camp. It's located about 2.5 hours from Eureka. It would be east of Eureka. And it takes, again, I'm not sure what the mileage is, but it takes about 2.5 hours. So we're about 30 air miles south of the Oregon border. So we're up in the corner of Happy Camp. I mean, up in the corner of Siskiyou County, so. And Happy Camp's located in the mountains in this really nice little bowl. And Uncle Casey says that the temperature here is different. It's warmer in the summers and it's warmer in the winters a lot. So that it has this little microclimate in Happy Camp. And a lot of people, they come in here, and I've heard people say, well, it's too remote. I don't want to live there. But we like it here. There's everything that a person could want in this area and along the Klamath River. So this is our home. It's been a native village for, like I said, generations, hundreds of years, thousands of years. Each of the flat areas along the river course are at a premium on the Klamath River. So usually if you have a nice flat area with a good creek running through, you will have had a native village. And the miners came through here in the 1850s or so, and they had found gold in Wairika, and thus begun the gold rush. And so a lot of people was looking for gold. They came up, and there was a lot of conflict between the non-native people would come in and actually kill a lot of the native people and just take over the village. So once where Indian Village stood, became a town.
Right, that premium land, like you said.
Yeah.
So this is where you lived during the flood. What were your memories of that time?
My memories, the flood I was about 6 years old. So the flood really seems to have stood out in my mind. I can remember a few things that happened more, and the memories are fresher and more vivid than, let's see, when I was 7 or 8 or 9. So it must have made a pretty good impression on me. And I do remember some things. I remember being at our house. We live on an upper flat here in Happy Camp. There's a lower flat, which was the old town, and then the upper flat is where we had our house. I remember it was very cozy, really warm and cozy, and I can remember everything was. We had gasoline lanterns, kerosene lanterns, and so it gave us that beautiful orange glow. And there were a lot of people there, and we played a lot of board games. I remember Monopoly. That's when I really got to learn Monopoly, was from having a lot of people in the house, and there being a lot of I remember there being a lot of board games going on. We had some of the Tom family living with us and the McDaniel family. And I remember riding with my grandfather in a white Cherokee Jeep, and it seemed like we were shuttling people different places. We had people in the car, and they were talking, about social things, and we would go up Indian Creek and we would drop some people off. And then I remember us going other places because my grandpa had a Jeep, and my grandma and grandpa always helped people. And they were good community members, and a lot of people looked to my grandma and grandpa because they were good people. They would help people. And everybody helped everybody during that time in the 60s, 64 around here, especially during the flood time. And I can remember one time when we were downtown, my grandpa said, let's go downtown. And that's when it was the river was getting really high. And Uncle Casey was with us, and we stopped the white Cherokee Jeep down kind of on the upper flat by the Frontier, the Frontier restaurant and bar. And I remember it sitting there, and I got out, and there was probably about a foot and a half. I was short, so it seemed like the water was pretty deep, but I think it was a couple feet deep. And I remember slogging through the water, and then my grandfather and I were walking over towards this white bridge. And just as we got over towards it, all of a sudden the white bridge, which it was in the middle of town, the old wood bridge, just dropped. And then it started, it sunk a little bit, and it started floating downriver. And all the people that were in town, I can remember a big rush of people running after that bridge to watch that bridge smash into the other one, the cement one that was closest to the Klamath River. And it sunk a little bit, and then you could see the top of it, and then it went down and smashed against the other bridge. And I remember there was a big loader would be on probably the north side of the bridge, and he had been working there because there was already some logs piled up against the bridge. So I remember that was real excitement of everybody, running down to watch one bridge smash into the other one. The thing I remember too is the helicopters. I think it's the first time I saw those great big double-bladed they call them banana helicopters. Uncle Casey, what'd you call those? Banana helicopters?
Flying bananas, is that right? They call them flying bananas.
The big green ones. And I remember the sound of them because it was bap, 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 bap. And it seemed to me that they seemed to come and go a lot. And that was one of the things of the flood that I can really remember, seeing those huge helicopters for the first time coming into town. Let's see.
How about food? You could talk a little bit about food.
I'm going to take off his armor.
Okay.
I'm afraid your
Yeah,
arms are going to fall off.
we don't want to lose
thank you.
anybody on this trip. So far, we haven't had any
you were doing okay.
casualties. We were talking about blood, sweat, and tears with making this movie, but we've had some of those things.
Can you back out a little bit? You're in the frame. There you go.
Me?
Sorry.
Barely.
I make it harder for you.
Well, I remember we always had food. You know, there was the smell of baking bread, and there was never any thought. It never seemed like anything was abnormal to me as a child, as far as food resources. I just remember there was quite a few people in the house, and that they stayed for, it seemed to me, for quite a long time, even after the floods subsided and some people went away. There were some people that stayed with us quite a little bit longer than the other people. It just seemed like it was a house full of happiness, from what I could tell. You know, and it had this warm glow of the lantern, and it was warm because we always had firewood. We had a wood stove, so we always had a lot of firewood. My grandpa always cut firewood. So it just seemed to me, there wasn't a lot of drama for me. It was warm and cozy. We were well taken care of, and it was just that there were these odd things happening, like helicopters coming in, bridges washing out, and pretty much what again, 6 years old, that's pretty much what I can remember. It just, for me, it was a warm, fuzzy feeling.
Sounds like your family did a good job of making you feel really secure in the midst of what, you know, if depending on how they react to things. I mean, you kids pick up on that, so it sounds like they did a good job of making you feel good.
Yeah, well, I never really thought, never did I feel threatened or scared or anything. It was just these new experience that happened, you know, seeing new things, seeing things a little different. But my grandfather was always, he could do anything. He was a wonderful man. And he always was very calm and thought out and just really mellow about things, and because he worked for the Forest Service, so he was always out in the woods, and lived, you know, grew up on the river. He was Karuk too, and so it seemed like there was nothing that came along that we couldn't handle. And then my grandmother, Esther, she was a very caring, very nurturing woman, very strong woman, and I always felt secure with them. And so it wasn't a lot of drama. Let's just say it was a different experience, but it seemed like it was, you know, everyday life. It wasn't an extra unordinary time.
Okay.
Just different experiences.
What are your thoughts about that idea of, you know, people who live in remote areas having, you know, really, you can't just run into town and get a whatever you need, maybe, because it may be too far to go, and so you get really good at problem solving. And so we think that maybe people in these regions, Humboldt, Del Norte, Siskiyou, and Trinity, did better than probably people in urban areas when they get hit by a disaster.
Because when you're up in an area like this, you depend on yourself. You and your family, you make sure that you have enough food, resources, and it's a way of doing things, a cultural knowledge that we have here, being Karuk, that other people don't. You know, for us, the forest isn't a strange thing. It's not a foreign place. It's our home. It's where all the resources, we know a lot of the plants and animals, and so we know that every month there is something coming in to production, something to be gathered, something to do. It's a way of life. There's always something to do here on the river. And as a life way, we go out and do that. We go out and gather the salmon. Everybody goes dip netting down at the falls in the fall time, September, October, November. And while we're dipping for salmon, We also know that the tan oak acorns are falling, so we're also gathering acorns and pepper nuts and putting them in gunny sacks, or now I use orange, you know, where the oranges come in those orange sacks with the holes in them. Well, so I'll put my tan oak acorns and my pepperwood nuts in, and then we hang them up behind the fire, which our stove, which is wood fire, and they dry, and then they'll last for a couple of years. So we always have those type of resources. Also, in the fall time is time to hunt the deer. So we like to get a couple deer canned up, put in the freezer, and have a couple deer to last us through the year. We nowadays, when we go down fishing, we'll go fishing at the falls, but we also have friends in Yurok territory, so we'll go down towards Pequon and Johnson's and go down and gather some fish down there, some salmon. And then first batch we usually bring home, we'll strip it up, hang it in a smokehouse, smoke it. Takes about 3 days of smoke, 2 to 3 days of smoke on it. We use rotten alder, and then we'll let it hang for 2 days. Then we'll, you know, give or take depending on what we want to do with it. Then we'll bring it back into the house, cut them up into small, we have the strips that are pretty long sometimes, and then we just keep cutting them into pieces about this long and put them in the canning jars, and then put the lid on it, and then put it in the oven and bake it for a while, or put it in a canner, and then basically it'll seal the jars, and then we put that away. Then we go down and we get some more fish, and then we freeze that. So that's frozen in our freezer, ready to eat. So we have a variety of ways to process things so that we can have them for a year or two. You're kind of always definitely looking towards gathering resources for a year. And then, you know, you might get a little more for the following year, because different plants and different things have, you know, different shelf life when you dry them. And then December, January, and February, a lot of times they're eel fishing for eels, or if the water's high, they're down there along the river dip netting for steelhead. So there's always those resources. And then March, April, May, and June, you're usually gathering the herbs, because that's when the herbs come into production. They're real small, but then as they grow, they get stronger and stronger. But then as it gets into summer, they lose some of their potency and some of their juice. So you're out gathering different types of herbs for teas. And then July, August, and September, you're out getting the huckleberries, the elderberries, the blackberries, and you're canning those. So, and that's just a few of the things that we gather, but it's a way of life. It's what makes us happy. You know, I've heard a lot of people say, well, it's so hard to fix acorn soup. No, it's not. It's fun. It doesn't take that long to leach the tetanic acid out of it. It's a life way. What makes you happy, because you're out in the woods, you're out with the plants. It's a beautiful day. The river, listen to the river. I mean, what better place could a person be? You know, it is a wonderful experience. You just feel so alive. And so for us, our environment, and it has allowed our ancestors to subsist here for generations. And they passed down that knowledge of how to live out in the forest. And I work for the Forest Service. I always have. My grandfather worked for the Forest Service. My great-grandfather did, because that's kind of, you know, there's a few jobs here. And one of them was the mill, and the other was the agencies. And when I go out into the forest, I've gone out with foresters, and I've showed them all these different plants, and, well, as many as we could on our walk, and told them about these different plants that we use and how we use them. And at the end of the day, I had one turn to me and say, you know, Kathy, I learned more about the forest from you in one day than I did in my whole career in school, learning about forestry. Because there's so much more to the forest for Native people, to the woods, than, you know, just the trees.
Right, the trees and only the species that is harvestable and you can get a market price for it.
Thank you
know?
for finishing that
Yeah,
sentence.
sorry.
Well, I know it was in my head, but I didn't want to say it. I'm trying to be.
No, I know what you mean.
I still work for the Forest Service, so you know.
Okay, so these guys are going to switch.
Okay. I still work for the.
Doing the
Are you
hard
on?
thing.
I still work
Oh,
for
yeah.
the Forest Service, so
Yeah,
I'm trying to
we
be
won't- we won't be
politically
putting that one in the
correct.
movie, but I know what you mean.
Correct.
But I think what we'll do is give you some of this so you can have this on video for yourself too.
Oh, thank you.
So, yeah. Yeah.
Because I do, a lot of people come to me like fuels projects and stuff. There was a really good one that the Mid-Watershed Council put together, Mid-Klamath Watershed Council, about prescribed burning.
I saw that.
Yeah, I was in that
a
one.
well done film.
Yeah.
And now I'll have to go back and watch it and look for you because that was really well done. And yeah, I just interviewed Margot Robbins about
Yeah.
acorns and so she and I arranged them to go up there sometime and videotape her doing that whole
Yeah.
acorn process, both the old way and the new way.
Hey, it's really important. You know, there are so many things around us that, again, people have lived here for hundreds and thousands of years because of the resources around them. And the last thing we want to do here, and Native people and other people that live in a community like this, is be dependent on someone else for their food. Because when the bridge goes out, when that road closes, you know, there's not going to be, you know, now in this day and age, they used to give away food because your freezer was breaking in 1964. Sometimes, you know, that food's going to be a commodity, and who's ever got the most money is probably the one who's going to be able to get that food. You know, the times aren't like they were in 1964. You know, they are to a certain extent, but now, you know, food would be more of a commodity than it was before. Do you see what I'm
Right,
saying?
yeah. It was integrated into your whole way of living too.
And bonding together and supporting each other. And so I think a lot of the way I think about things is it's a joy to be out in the forest and gathering the plants and being with the plants. You know, sometimes I refer to them as resources, but they have a spirit. You know, things have a spirit as much as people do. And for me, when I go out and gather, I'm really careful not to pull the whole plant up and pull it up by the roots. I'm just borrowing a little bit of it that I need for sustenance, but I also need that plant, and I want it to live. I want it to keep its roots in there. And so for tribal people, I know a lot of tribal people, and for me, everything around us has a spirit. The birds, you know, singing, they all have these spirits, and they're as important and have as much right to be here as I do. And the plants, and even the little bugs. My cousin was laughing at me this morning because there was a little earwig crawling across the floor, and he started to put his foot on it, and I'm like, don't, stop! And he's like, kind of scared him, and he's like, what? And I go, that earwig, you're going to smash him. And so I put him on a little piece of paper, carried him outside, and put him in the grass. You know, that type of concept of everything having a right to live, to be there, and it carries on to plants. We all take care of each other, the plants, and we take care of the animals, and then they reciprocate and take care of us.
I like the idea of thanking things too. Like when my husband comes home with a lot of fish, and I'll just say, "Thank you, little guy. You know, you gave your life, and we're going to enjoy eating you. And thank you." You know, I like that idea.
That's what a lot of our ceremonies are about. You know, the war renewal ceremonies, and people have, you know, there's certain prayers that they come up with to thank. You know, I'm a tree hugger. I'll go hug that tree and thank that tree for giving me acorns. You know, it is that verbalizing, you know, your how happy you are and how thankful you are to be blessed to have this time on earth, and to share all the wonderful, miraculous things, and that these things also can help you live. And so it's a great place to be, the mountains, and especially here.
Can you tell me about how Happy Camp got its name?
Well, there's a story about miners coming and they found some gold. There's a couple different stories, but this is the one that kind of resonates. As a matter of fact, I have a little piece of paper that I should fax to you, and it's how Happy Camp got its name.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And apparently someone said that, and this is what the little article says, is that they came in, they camped here, some miners, they struck some gold, had a party, they were all happy about it, had a party that night, and then posted a note on the tree, you know, Happy Camp, that they were so happy they struck gold. But another name that Happy Camp had before it had Happy Camp was Murderer's Bar. I wasn't quite as happy. And I'm not sure why it had that name, but I kind of think, you know, when they came through and killed the Indian people that were here, you know, ran them off so that they could, you know.
Take what they had.
Yes, exactly. And that's how the miners, a lot of how they were able to take over some of these areas, because the native people had food stored in their houses for a year or so, you know, to make it through the winter. So you come in, you wipe people's food out, you know, and plus killing people. But that type of violence and oppression and limiting people's, you know, ability to live in an area, basically chasing them off to the mountains. And then as they established their towns, and then Indian people weren't considered a threat anymore, then, you know, the Indian people could filter kind of back into the areas, but there was always immense prejudice against Indian people.
Do you know the Karuk name for this place?
It's on right here. I'm not very good at pronouncing it, but this is what it is. So if you want to do a close-up on this is the spelling.
Wow.
I'm on manual focus, maybe. Mike, you might want to check that.
And
Button on your left of the screen.
Karuk Tribe Spring Basket Weaver Gathering. And so we always have, Verna Reese is one of our very, very good and well-known weavers who does a lot of teaching. She coordinates this yearly basket weaver gathering and we also have a tribal reunion where people who have had to go away from the village towns to find work can come back, and everybody can see, you know, the relatives and get together. And so a weekend every year they'll have the tribal, what they call the tribal reunion, or the basket weaver gathering. So
That's great to have a date where people can come back and then remember this place, you know. Oh.
I was just going to tell you, when you look up this word in the Karuk dictionary, it basically means hazel stick.
Oh, okay.
Because,
Baskets.
yeah, along the Indian Creek used to be a lot of, or still is, hazel.